Reports of attacks in northeast Nigeria as the country's delayed election is now underway. President Muhammadu Buhari in a close race with businessman Atiku Abubakar. And Nicolas Maduro's power struggle with Juan Guaido intensifies in Venezuela. Part of the border with Colombia shut on the eve of the opposition leader's deadline to deliver stockpiled aid. This as 2 civilians were killed on the closed border with Brazil. And the Paris Farm Fair begins. Emmanuel Macron speaking at the annual event. But will the French president have a cow? Or rather, will his chickens come home to roost? And attacks have been reported in northeast Nigeria just 2 hours before voting began in an already delayed election. Security, a major concern because of extremists who want to disrupt the vote, but also between rival political groups. President Muhammadu Buhari is in a tight race with businessman Atiku Abubakar. The election was originally slated for last week until there were major logistical problems. Solange Moujon takes a look at the colossal challenge of organizing elections in Africa's most populous country.
120,000 polling stations, 84 million voters, and a burgeoning democracy. As voters head to the polls, the colossal task of prepping Nigeria for its presidential and parliamentary elections has, according to its election committee, been accomplished.
Preparation is very well done because, as you can see, the men and the materials were started moving to the rack centers.
Last week, just hours before polling places were set to open, the committee postponed the vote, pushing it by a week. A move that has increased tensions and distrust on all sides in an already fraught atmosphere over fears of violence between supporters of the president and his main rival, Atiku Abubakar. After threatening anyone who plans to disrupt the vote with, quote, the expense of his life, President Muhammadu Buhari took a more conciliatory tone Friday and congratulated his supporters for not reverting to violence.
Many were worried and thought the worst might happen. You proved them wrong by showing that you are a great people with an abiding love for peace, democracy, and the unity of our country.
Voters, too, have been calling for calm.
Peace must prevail, because even if your candidate wins and there's no peace, the purpose or the is defeated.
Just hours before voting places opened, Islamist militants attacked the northeastern town of Gaidam, forcing residents to flee. Blasts were also heard in Maiduguri. And on Friday, small but fatal clashes between rival supporters did break out in Kofa, in the state of Kano in northwest Nigeria. It is one of a dozen states that Nigerian security services fear could see election-related violence.
After months of protests against him, Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir said he would dissolve the federal government, sack all state governors, and declare a one-year-long state of emergency. Demonstrations began back in December over cuts to food and fuel subsidies, but quickly mushroomed into calls for him to resign after 30 years in power. Activists say since the protests began, over 1,000 people have been detained, and more than 50 killed in clashes. Peter O'Brien has more.
Faced with the biggest protests since he came to power 30 years ago, Sudan's president has spoken.
To realize the aspirations of our people and our dreams of renaissance, rebuilding, and well-being, I hereby declare a state of emergency for 1 year throughout the country.
Omar al-Bashir has dissolved both the central and state governments, and he's postponed constitutional amendments that would have allowed him to run for another term. In response, the protests' organisers vowed to press on until he quits.
We are calling on our people to continue the demonstrations until the main aim of this uprising, the stepping down of the regime's leader, is achieved.
In December, unrest erupted against a government decision to triple bread prices, but it developed into widespread anger over the country's leadership. Officials say at least 30 people have died and hundreds have been wounded during the near-daily demonstrations. But Human Rights Watch says more than 50 have been killed, including children. Omar al-Bashir has ruled the country since a military coup in 1989. He's long been wanted by the International Criminal Court over accusations of genocide and war crimes.
As international pressure mounts for a breakthrough in the Venezuelan crisis, Nicolas Maduro's government has further insulated itself, partially shutting down the border near Cúcuta, Colombia, where international humanitarian aid has been stockpiled at the request of opposition leader Juan Guaido. On Friday, rival concerts just 300 meters apart were held, one for President Nicolas Maduro, the other for Guaido, who defied a travel ban and crossed into Colombia for the so-called Venezuelan Live Aid, which was organized by Richard Branson. Earlier, we spoke to our Caracas correspondent, Ana Herrero, about the heightened tensions and the partial closure of the Colombian border.
We all expected that this was something that the government was supposed to do. Actually, we were surprised that they didn't do this before. They announced it very early, late night this Friday. And but you know, the opposition always said that they are expecting this kind of response from the government, but they're not looking at the government to give them any permission. They are looking at the military. Everything this Saturday is going to be about the military. They are going to be the ones that are going to allow or not the international aid in the different borders. And the opposition knows this. They're calling for them. They're asking them to help and to unite to this, what they call a fair cause for all Venezuelans.
In Syria, U.S.-backed and Kurdish-led forces continue their push on the final enclave held by the Islamic State group in the east of the country. Focus on less than half a square kilometer. But before the battle can press on, civilians are being evacuated from the village of Baghuz near the Iraqi border. The spokesman for the Syrian Democratic Forces estimated that more than 2,000 people were still inside the small pocket, but on Friday, more than 40 trucks carrying men, women, and children left the enclave. Donald Trump has nominated the current U.S. ambassador to Canada, Kelly Craft, to become the U.S. envoy to the United Nations. She's a top Republican donor from Kentucky who rose this week as a serious contender for the post following a recommendation from her fellow Kentuckian, Senator Mitch McConnell. The post has been downgraded from a cabinet position. If lawmakers confirm Craft, she would replace Nikki Haley, who left the post 4 months ago. Well, later today, an extraordinary meeting over the child sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church reconvenes at the Vatican. Critics are demanding concrete measures and accountability. The conference had opened on Thursday with the testimony of victims, while Claire Musson takes a look back at Friday's events.
Day 2 of a landmark summit. Cardinals and other Vatican representatives struck a somber tone, acknowledging the Church's failure to protect children from sexual abuse by clergy.
The sexual abuse of minors and other vulnerable people not only breaks divine and ecclesiastical law, but it's also public criminal behavior.
The Vatican has for decades largely given a pass to bishops and superiors who moved the predators around from parish to parish. Friday's speakers said the cover-ups have worsened the crisis.
The call of the Church to accompany victims demands a mindset that categorically rejects cover-ups, or the Council to distance ourselves from survivors of abuse for legal reasons or out of fear of scandal.
The cardinal said that victims of abuse should receive psychological counseling and other support paid for by the accused bishop's diocese. Other proposed measures include a telephone line and web portal for victims to report abusers to authorities outside their diocese. But will it be enough? The summit is being watched by victims and church members all over the world, and not all are convinced.
It's easy to talk and ask for forgiveness and to say zero tolerance. They have always said that. But the point is, when are they really taking responsibility?
We want zero tolerance for the children and the young people of today, because the church is in charge of so many young people all over the world. They need clear guidelines and norms.
Faced with a series of scandals over the past year, Pope Francis has called for the conference to come up with concrete measures to deal with clerical abuse. They're not expected to be announced until after the summit ends on Sunday.
Pop star R. Kelly has turned himself into authorities in the U.S. state of Illinois after being charged with 10 counts of sexual assault, at least 9 of which involve minors. The accusations are spread over a decade and relate to 4 victims. For years, a singer whose real name is Robert Sylvester Kelly has faced allegations of sexual abuse against women and teenagers, but has never been convicted and previously denied other allegations. The indictment comes just weeks after a documentary series called Surviving R. Kelly aired in the United States.
Robert Kelly was indicted before a Cook County grand jury on 10 counts of aggravated criminal sexual abuse involving 4 victims. Aggravated criminal sexual abuse is a Class 2 felony with a sentencing range of 3 to 7 years per count. It is also probationable.
French President Emmanuel Macron speaking at the Paris Farm Fair, though it is a risky endeavor as Macron suffering from low approval ratings. And today is the 15th consecutive Saturday of yellow vest protests against him. Still, it's an opportunity for the president to appeal to the farming industry. Agriculture plays a major role in the economy. And in the run-up, France 24 met Cyrielle Martin, a sheep farmer, who took us through a day on the job.
In France's northeastern countryside, these 450 sheep live outdoors pretty much the whole year round, living off the grass when no hay is to be found.
They're made for the outdoors, even when it's cold.
10 years ago, Cyrielle Martin swapped her cows for sheep, a less constraining and more profitable business.
What we can't do on one day, we can postpone till the next. With milking, you have to be there morning and evening at a fixed time.
Cyrielle has spent €80,000 on her outhouse and buying all necessary material for her herd. Each year, her sheep give birth to 550 lambs. Their meat she sells on to a butcher, enough to repay her loans and provide her with a salary of €900. But sheep are good for other things besides meat. 2 to 3 kilos of wool is sheared off their backs, perfect to make mattresses or pillows. Along with 12 other breeders in the region, she sells her wool to a local cooperative. The wool is washed, then passed through a carding machine, giving it back its natural volume.
It allows for air to enter into the hollow fibres, and the magic test is to scrunch up the ball of wool, and then it nearly jumps out of your palm. Hello.
Hello.
Here's Jefferson, the new recruit. He's working on the padding.
D'accord. The cooperative was established in June last year and has 7 workers on its payroll. Its ambition is to produce 250 mattresses per year and revive a craft that since the 70s has been outsourced to Asia.
Our project allows us to pay our breeders better. Today we pay them €1.50 per kilo. Our aim is that in 2 to 3 years' time that will double. All the while, in today's normal market, it could be worth only 40 to 60 cents.
For Cyrielle, it's a welcome boost to her income, and her family can look forward to soon sleeping on a mattress made from her own wool.
And from French farms to France's silver screen, last night the film industry honoring the country's premier stars and movies, the César. One of the big winners of the night was the French movie Jusqu'à la Garde, or Custody in English. It won 4 prizes, including Best Film and Best Actress for its star Léa Drucker. It tells a story about domestic violence. Meanwhile, Robert Redford was a guest of honor at this year's event, the 44th annual César.
First of all, I love being back in Paris. That's the main thing. And I'm very touched by being honored by the French people because of the time I spent in France here many, many years ago when nobody knew who I was. So tonight to have that kind of reaction was very touching.
That's it from the newsroom. Please stay tuned to France 24.